Hello, my name is Michael Brown, and it's my pleasure to be with you as we talk a little bit about some exam tips and strategy for the U.S. CPA exam. First, let's take a look at the material we're going to cover today. First off, I'll do a brief introduction about me, so you know who's going to be talking to you for the next while. Then we'll kind of walk through the stages of your preparation. That begins with how you're preparing for the CPA exam and how to ensure that your preparation is as effective as it can be. Second, we'll talk about some strategies you can use on exam day, some specific tools to help you with your time management and other techniques that will maximize your chances of getting that 75 and passing each of the exams. Next, I'll talk a little bit about what the experience is like. If you're watching this video and you haven't sat for your first part just yet, you don't know quite what to expect, and going to a CPA exam testing center is a, unique experience. There's some specific things I want to make you aware of, hopefully to take some surprises out of your first trip. And finally, I'll touch very briefly on what will happen after you pass the exam. Ultimately, to get your CPA license, the process, the requirements, and also touch briefly on continuing education. All right, why don't we get started with a little bit about me. So my experience is pretty varied. Though I started in public accounting and I am a CPA, I've also worked in the corporate sector before finding myself with Becker. So I work now in education. I actually work with Becker in managing their faculty, but I started out with Ernst & Young, LLP, in Atlanta. That's in the southeastern United States. And I worked in their audit practice, had a variety of clients in several sectors, manufacturing, financial services, retail, among others. Then moving into corporate accounting, I spent years as a controller, both in real estate and in service. I relocated and began my work with Becker, and today I'm one of 3 regional faculty managers, which basically means I'm responsible, in part, for training, recruiting, and developing the instructors in the United States. In fact, I manage over 200 Becker faculty in the eastern United States. In addition, I have the great pleasure to teach some of the Becker classes in my hometown of Philadelphia. And I'm one of Becker's national instructors, so I get to be on the videos that you have or will see, both for auditing. I'm on the Audit 4 and Audit 5 lectures. I'm also going to be later this year on Business 4 and Business 6. So that's a little bit about me. But you didn't tune in for this presentation to learn about me. You tuned in to learn about exam strategy. So let's talk a little bit about how to maximize your effectiveness in preparing for the CPA exam. Let's walk through some points. First off, one of the reasons that this exam is a little more, I don't want to say easier, but a little more manageable perhaps now than it used to be, is that you can study for one part at a time, or at least narrow your focus to 1 or 2 parts, and then go and take those 1 or 2 parts. Those of us who took the exam before 2004 will love to tell you how we had to take the exam, all 4 parts, in 2 days straight. So, granted, you have that a little easier, but then there's content that's on your exam that wasn't on mine. For example, there was no business exam when I took the CPA exam. All right, point 2. It's really easy to fall victim to making an unrealistic study plan. When you commit to this process, as you sit there, you've made a commitment to spend hours and hours studying, preparing, in class and on your own, with the intention to successfully pass this exam. However, that's a long process. It's important to realize that you cannot study 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, nonstop, and expect to be able to maintain a level of effectiveness throughout the process. It's critically important that you be realistic. Understand, what are you trying to balance? Your personal commitments, your friends, your family, your work. So you have to decide how much time you can realistically devote to studying. Now, what's tough is that in point 3, just the CPA review component, basically if you were just looking at the Becker videos and the Becker software, Any one part of that could be 60 to 100 hours of time, and that's lecture content. You can multiply that number by 3 to kind of get a sense of how many hours in total you're going to spend over all the parts of the exam. So we're talking 300, perhaps even 400 hours, and that doesn't even include the time you'll spend with CDL reviewing their lecture material or being in their classes. So it's a significant investment. But it's also hard to wrap your head around that. It's hard to say, well, how do I break up 400 or 600 or 800 hours? Well, it's important to break it down in number 4. Make it daily. Don't think about, I need to spend 800 hours. Think about, I need to spend 2 hours, or I intend to spend 3 hours, or 4 hours on a given evening, or more time on a Saturday or a Sunday. Again, I can't give you a one-size-fits-all recommendation because, well, you're all different. Every person has different commitments in their life, and they have to figure out what's the right balance to maintain effectiveness, but can successfully complete the investment of hours necessary to pass. Point 5, make friends. So one thing that's tough is that your family won't necessarily understand what you're going through. They won't understand why you lock yourself up in a room for hours on end just studying. Hopefully they're supportive of the goal, but they may not understand why you're spending so much time. But there is a group that will, the other people studying to take the exam. And that's why it's good to have study partners, whether it's just that, to have someone to talk to, discuss how they're spending their time, what their strategy is. And it can also be useful if you appreciate group studying, going through material together. Oftentimes, what one person will find challenging, perhaps someone else will find easier, and vice versa. So take advantage of your colleagues and peers who are in this process with you. And finally, the sooner the better. Unfortunately, the CPA exam is an academic exam, meaning it's rooted in theory. It's rooted in the same material you find in a textbook. So the fresher that information is in your mind, the better prepared you will be for this exam. Now, the good news is, again, with CDL, you're getting a lot of that foundation as part of this process. So you're getting the information that's going to be so useful to you as you prepare and actually sit for the exam. All right, some final tips. Final here doesn't mean this is the end. No, I mean final in, well, what do I do right before I'm going to go sit for the test? Well, number 1 is, how much time should you devote to this final review before the exam? A week at a minimum. 2 weeks is pretty good. I think 3 weeks can even be a reasonable amount of time. Now, during that period, you're really revisiting all the material that's going to be on that exam. This is your chance to revisit areas that you struggled with, those sections that you believe are the most challenging and present the greatest difficulty for you on the exam. Use the Becker software in this case. One of the tools provided are 2 per part full practice exams. Do them under exam conditions. Now, when you take the financial or the auditing exam, it's a 4-hour exam. When you take regulation or business, it's a 3-hour exam. So when you want to practice, set aside 3 or 4 hours. Put yourself in a quiet room. Go to a library or somewhere where you can complete the work undisturbed. Because that's more or less what it's going to be like when you go to the testing center. Just you and the computer, quiet room with the clock. And so helping you understand the feeling of what that's going to be like is critically important. One mistake good students make, and it's an easy mistake to make, is reviewing more than you have to. Understand that the AICPA, who write this exam, publish what's called the Content Specification Outline, or CSO for short. Now, you can find it. It's available online as a downloadable PDF if you'd like to look at it. But it's pretty boring. It's a listing, about 40 pages long, of everything the AICPA says can be tested on the exam. In short, if it's not on that list, it's not going to be on the test. Well, when you look at your Becker textbooks, if it's on that list, it's in our book. So when you look at a Becker textbook, you can feel comfortable that if it's not in that book, it's not something you need to study because it's not going to be on the test. So it's important to only review the material that you've worked with on your study plan. And number 4 is tough. I realize that you may sit there and say, no, Mike, I'm going to commit every waking hour I have to this. No matter what, outside of work and sleep, this is it. I'm going to be all about the CPA exam. And that's a laudable goal. But is it realistic? You see, the more you work, especially if you don't give yourself a break, your effectiveness will go down. It's hard to stay focused. So give yourself permission to take a break. Build that into your study plan. When I talk to a lot of American students, and particularly American students that have prepared for and now successfully passed the exam, many times they tell me their study plan was, 6 days a week, they had time set aside to study. But 1 day a week, they put the books away. And they took time for themselves, whatever that activity may be. So, again, I can't give you a one-size-fits-all answer because everyone relaxes differently. So if you have an activity that helps you to relax, that you really enjoy, for some that's exercise, running, maybe walking through a park, going to watch a movie, going out with friends, whatever it might be, do it. Make sure you take time for yourself because this is a long process and you're going to need those breaks. There we go. All right, so let's change gears. We've talked a little bit about what you can do to be more effective during your preparation. Let's now talk about some specific strategies you can use on exam day. Things that I hope you'll hear my voice in the back of your head while you're sitting there at the testing center. And I hope, maybe, just maybe, 1 or 2 of these strategies will help get you that 1 or 2 extra points that will make the difference in you passing the exam. All right. What I want to start with is a bit of an understanding of how the test is built. So what you see here is a diagram, and it's this part over here that I think is most important. So when you prepare for the financial or the audit, the regulation, or the business exam, all 4 of them start the same way. They start with 3 testlets. Now, all a testlet is, it's not even, don't feel bad if you've never heard that word before. We haven't either. It's not in any English dictionary I've ever seen. Pretty sure the AICPA made it up. But what's important to realize is it's as if you're taking 3 miniature tests in a row. So the first test, testlet 1, is going to include either 24 questions for regulation and business or 30 questions for financial and audit. And it's up to you to decide how to manage those 30 questions or those 24 questions. But here's what's important to realize. Every single question on the CPA exam is assigned a difficulty rating by the AICPA. So every question could be easy or medium or hard or very hard. You don't get to know that. They don't put that on the exam as you're taking it. But here's what's important. You'll notice that testlet number 1 is medium difficult, meaning the mix of questions might have, kind of like a recipe, would have so many easy, so many medium, and so many hard. If you do well on that first testlet, the computer will make a quick check of your score. And if you do well, the difficulty of your second testlet will be higher. Now that just means the mix changes, right? Maybe a couple less easy questions, a couple more hard ones. Now, the reason that's okay is that the difficulty of the question is part of your final score. So you may not need to get as many correct if you're getting harder questions correct. You might be sitting there saying, okay, what good does this information do me on the exam? Well, what we find is some candidates say when they move here, they feel like the exam got harder. That's actually a good sign. If you feel like it got more difficult, it probably means you did very well on your first testlet. The same token, what if you don't feel like that way? Well, that's okay, because there's only 2 difficulty levels, what they call medium and difficult. So if you get here, maybe you did okay on the first testlet, but that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to fail, any more than doing well on the first testlet automatically means you're going to pass. But just understand the difficulty will change. And it may be a little hard to see, But after testlet 2, it can switch again. So if you do well here, difficult. If you don't do as well, it may revert back to medium. So understand that's part of the process. But it only happens with the multiple choice and not with the simulations. So let's start with the multiple choice. And we emphasize that for a really good reason in our course, in our software, because most of your points are going to come from multiple choice questions. For financial, for audit, for regulation, it's 60% of your score. For business, it's 85%. So being comfortable and effective with these questions is critical. First, understand what's unique about this exam. It's entirely possible that you either have not or may have only taken one or two computerized, standardized exams, like the CPA exam. So part of the experience, part of getting ready, is being used to what that looks like. Part of what Becker does. We make sure that our software will get you that level of comfort so that you know exactly how things are going to look when you sit down at the testing center. Second, we call it the call of the question. Now, all that means is it really talks about what order to read the question in. Many times, the multiple choice questions on the CPA exam will have a long series of facts or information, perhaps several sentences long. Here's the problem. The AI CPA loves to put information into the question that is irrelevant, makes no difference. Part of the job you have to do is figure out, what do I need and what's useless? And that's why how you read the question becomes important. Don't read it from top to bottom. First thing you should read is the last line of a longer question. That's the call of the question. Literally, what does the question actually want to know? If you do that first, then as you work through the facts, as you work through the information in the question, you'll know as you go, oh, I don't need that. That's not important. And then you can center in on that piece of information. That's what I need, because that's what the question asked. You see, if you don't do it that way, you'll read the question top to bottom, and you won't be sure. You'll think, well, maybe that's important. I don't know. Maybe that fact's useful. You get to the end of the question, and then you see, oh, that's what they want to know. Okay. And you end up having to go back and read the question again anyway. So you can understand, do this over the course of the exam. How many minutes are you going to save? And time management, you're going to hear me talk about that a few times today. Time management, so important. All right, number 3. And this is one of my favorite parts about the exam. Now, you may read this and say, read all 4 choices before picking your answer. And usually students, when they hear that for the first time, say, yeah, why would I not read all 4? That makes no sense. Here's why I say that. It's human nature. It's not even a difference between an American student and a British student and a Chinese student. It's being a human being. We don't like to pick A. We don't like to pick the first answer choice. Reason is, it's the same thing when we say it's too good to be true. It's hard to believe the very first thing you read is the right answer. You wonder, am I just thinking it's too good? And you start second guessing. So people don't like to pick A. They also don't like to pick D, the 4th answer choice, because you end up second guessing yourself. You say, is D really the right answer? Or did I just dismiss A, B, and C, and I've accepted that D must be right because it's the only one left? More often, students will pick B or C. And so actually, believe it or not, if you've ever heard in any of your schooling with multiple choice that if you have to guess C, there's actually some wisdom in that. Good test design will slightly favor B and C over A and D. But here's my point. That's why you want to read all 4 answers. You want to make sure you understand the value and can evaluate all 4. Another important reason is that the CPA exam doesn't ask for the correct answer. It wants the best answer. Sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 answers may be right, but different levels of it. It's more about which one is the best answer for that question. And so you don't want to stop short, only read 2 answers, decide that's correct, when in fact there's still a better answer you haven't seen. So make sure to read all 4. Time management, number 4. I'll be honest, I think more than any other skill on this exam, you need to have a very, very strong sense of time management. The AICPA doesn't do anything arbitrarily, including the design of the exam. They make you go through all the multiple choice before you reach the simulation questions, because they know multiple choice are some of the easiest questions for you to spend a lot of time agonizing. Is it B? Is it C? I don't know. And you waste time. You can't do that. You don't have the time to lose. On average, for the multiple choice, you'll have about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes per question. Now that is exactly that, an average. Some you may be able to answer in 10 seconds. Some will take you 3 or 4 minutes. But it's important to keep in mind this average. What that allows you to do is actually budget your time throughout the entire length of the exam. And we'll talk a little bit later on about kind of how much to budget for each testlet. And finally, answer them all. The AICPA calls it positive grading or positively graded. All that means is you don't get penalized for guessing. It's not a question of how many answers you get incorrect. It's a question of how many you get correct. Every correct answer adds to your score. So is there any reason not to guess, even if you completely are unsure of the answer? No, because you have nothing to lose. And honestly, on a multiple choice, at the very worst, you've got a 1 in 4 chance. It's certainly better than 0 if you don't answer it. So take the time to make sure you've answered every question. Okay, well, let's take a look at just a screenshot here of a typical multiple choice question. And just a few things I want to point out to you. First off, right up here at the top, that's the clock. Now, I want you to think about as you sit there at your computer or wherever you're watching this, imagine that's the computer screen at the testing center. Where's the clock? About eye level, right about here. Which means that no matter where you work on the exam, inevitably your eyes always seem to drift back to the clock. Yeah, again, I don't think the AICPA did that arbitrarily either. What's important is to recognize either the clock uses you or you can use the clock. How does the clock use you? If you don't have a time budget, if you don't have a plan, this serves as an intimidation. It will make you nervous because that clock counts down. When you first start the financial exam, it will say, time remaining, 4 hours, 0 minutes. And from that moment on, it's just going to count down towards 0. Just imagine, when it says 3 hours, then 2, then 1. How do you feel when it says time remaining 1 hour? You start thinking, oh, there's only an hour left. I'm way behind. What am I going to do? You can understand why this can create panic. That's the clock using you. How do you use the clock? Well, if you have a budget, you might say to yourself, okay, I need to be done with the first testlet, the first batch of questions by 3 hours, 10 minutes remaining. So you look up there, and when you see the clock reach 3 hours, 10 minutes remaining, you know, okay, if I have 1 or 2 questions I have not yet answered, it's time to make my best guess and move on, to ensure I stick to my time budget. I'll tell you that the critical, one might say the fatal mistake that many students make is they will spend too much time on the multiple choice, leaving not enough for the simulations, and that leads to failure. So it's important to go in with a strategy to manage your time and use that clock as a resource. Secondly, let's take a look at how you make your way through the questions. You'll notice that right across the bottom of the screen here, it's just numbers, 1 to 30. So just like a website, if you click a number, it'll go to that question. So can you work the questions in order? Can you work from 1 to 30? Absolutely you can. In fact, behind my right elbow here, there's a next button. So yeah, you can just go 1, 2, 3, 4. That's fine. But if you're like me, I like to jump around. I don't usually answer the questions right in order. I like to do the questions I'm sure about first, and maybe then I work on the ones I think are a little more challenging. You can do that. In fact, it may be a little hard to see, but underneath each number is a flag. You click it, the flag turns on. It doesn't affect your score, it doesn't affect the grading. It's just a visual reminder for you, a way of saying, I want to go back to that question before I'm finished. I want to take another look at it. I want to double check what I chose. So again, it's just understanding the functionality. What are the tools that are available? And then up here at the top, it says calculator, and that's what we have here on the middle of the screen. Now, I will tell you with all honesty, many Becker students say to us, you have this pretty amazing software. Why is there this terrible calculator in it? I mean, couldn't you do better? And we smile and we say, could we do better? Well, of course we could. But that calculator, as awful as it is the one you'll have on the CPA exam. So we believe that part of effective preparation is you have to get used to the tools you're going to have at your disposal on exam day. Bad calculator being one of them. So this is your chance when you're preparing to practice, to say, okay, how easy is it to use the calculator? Do I find that I want to use it at all? What many students figure out is they try not to use it very much. They prefer to use the scratch paper. It's really a scratch laminate card, but to do their arithmetic, their math. And if it's a complex calculation, then they'll use the calculator, but they use it sparingly. But the bottom line is they figure that out before they take the exam because they practice with it first and they know how easy or difficult it is to use. Now, I realize this may be a little difficult to see, but what I can tell you is if you want to look this up in your software after this presentation, you can. At the top left, when you go into your software, believe it or not, every Becker question is assigned a code number. And this one happens to be 00455. So you can actually use that code to look it up. But the reason I wanted to show this question to you, you can see, even if you can't read it, you can see that there's a lot of facts, right? There's a sentence up here, and then there's a number of lines of debits and credits. Remember what I said, though? Call of the question. If I just read the last line, that actually is all I need to read to answer it. The question says, in its December 31st, year 2, consolidated balance sheet, what amount should Wright report as an intercompany receivable? Well, that's the whole question. If it's a consolidated balance sheet, it shouldn't have any intercompany, right? Part of consolidation is eliminating intercompany receivables and payables. So the answer's got to be 0. All of this, useless. Just what we call distractor information. It's just there to see if you'll spend time looking at it, even though it doesn't matter. So don't do it. Read the call of the question first. But what I also want to show you here is 2 things about your preparation. Number 1 is that sometimes questions are shorter. So you don't really have a call of the question. You just read the one sentence. But the other thing I want to point out is how Becker explains the answer. You see, there are questions where the right answer is right, and that's really all you need to know. Like that last question. If you read the question, I don't really need to explain why $1 million is wrong. I told you why it must be 0. But sometimes it's just as important to understand why the wrong answers are wrong as it is to understand why the right answer is right. So take the time. When you're working through your practice, take the time to read the explanation, even if you got it right, unless you're sure of the answer. Sometimes students will make an educated guess as they practice. They do get it right. It's just as important then to make sure you confirm your understanding. Find out, yep, I was right on. That the reason I picked that question is the right one. But sometimes you'll find, okay, I guessed that way, but I didn't guess that way for the right reason. Maybe on the exam I wouldn't have guessed it correctly twice. So read the explanations that are provided.